So if we need to do
Onto
something,
the slide.
we have,
Oh, we have to share.
yeah, no, we have shared.
Just need to change the screen.
Oh,
Don't leave.
how do we get?
I think if you click on it behind, I should be able to,
Yeah.
yeah, great.
And then we,
And I'll put this up here and down there, that,
oh, okay.
okay, you got
Same
that.
thing, cool.
Okay, great. Okay, so I started learning about the inner workings of Wikipedia only 6 years ago. I've been a casual but regular user of the plot. Is it all okay?
Yeah.
Everything okay? A casual but regular user, using it in my personal life. I appreciated that it was ad-free, had no paywalls. And I'd go to it if I wanted to remember the dates of a battle or who was in a particular movie, you know, casual things like that. And when Wikipedia would post its annual fundraising appeals, I would typically donate every year out of gratitude for using the site. But I almost stopped donating in 2018 when I read an article in the Washington Post about Donna Strickland, who days earlier had won the Nobel Prize in physics. The story in the Washington Post was not about Strickland's award or accomplishments, but about how Wikipedia's anonymous volunteer editors had removed her initial entry on the grounds that she was not sufficiently notable. And I hadn't thought until then about who were the writers and editors of Wikipedia. So that was when I learned, following that news story, that was when I learned about the gender gap on Wikipedia, the fact that only something like 17% of English language biographies at the time were about women, a number that has since gone up with a lot of effort to about 20%. The news about Donna Strickland left me somewhat disillusioned. And by the way, at the end, when we have discussion, if you remind me, I have a follow-up to tell you about her. If there's time, I'll tell you. But so I was disillusioned. I thought I'll stop contributing. But then I read an article in our university library's blog about art history graduate students who had held an edit-a-thon to try to write more articles about women artists. And that's how I found out about the organization called the Wiki Education Foundation, which has a student program that provides tutorials for North American university educators and students on writing and editing in conjunction with courses. So I signed up in 2019, and since then have incorporated WikiEdu's program into one of my courses every semester. And I'm proud to say that Maria here was one of the first groups to participate in that. And the students range from first-year undergraduates to PhD level. Initially, I had students write new articles on their own, but later I realized that it would be more fun and rewarding for students and me to work together in small groups to research and draft articles. And because I wanted students to be conscious about what they were doing and aware of the debates about Wikipedia, I also assigned articles about Wikipedia while we were doing the work and about Wikipedia politics. So in the past few years, as this interest expanded, it's become an academic interest, and I've spoken on aspects of Wikipedia and its teaching potential in many online forums for organizations like the American Historical Association, which is the largest professional association of historians in the United States. Here was a panel we did that the AHA featured on one of its blogs. I've also spoken at the Creative Commons Summit, the Association for Computers and the Humanities, and other places. And I've spoken at venues with scholars who are at the forefront of developments in digital humanities and open access publishing. I feel excited and energized about collaborating with people who come from so many disciplines and fields, including library science, and from many different kinds of public, private, and nonprofit institutions associated with higher education, not just from an Ivy League university like Penn. So I've been meeting people and being on panels with people from large public universities and small religious colleges and all kinds of different places across the United States, somebody from a school of engineering and somebody from a school of Department of English Literature. And it's been really eye-opening and exhilarating to be aware of the ecosystem of Wikipedia across a broad higher educational landscape. I do count myself now as a Wikipedian, albeit as a Wikipedian on the margins, and I'm keenly aware of my weaknesses and strengths. I'm okay at coding, but on a very basic level. That's where I feel I need more training, but I don't know where to get it. My strength is in the research and writing. That's where I have a very good sense of that, because it's what we do at a place like, so writing the new articles, I've got that down. For me, it's the coding that's more of an issue. Now, Wikipedia is, as you know, an intensely political space, and I'd like to consider, with that in mind, its editing and its editors. Wikipedia's own page for Wikipedians declared, and it's updated every day, so these are yesterday's statistics, that they've got about 49 million users who have a registered username, but only about 30% have ever edited. So in other words, a lot of people sign up and never do anything. Only a minority contribute regularly or have contributed in the past month. And it gives, here the numbers you can see of who's made an edit. And a lot of these were people who have made only a very small one and never again. And so there are only something like 5,000 who make at least 100 edits every month. Now, as those of you who work with Wikipedia will know, one can make a minute change to the platform, literally just by changing a comma or correcting a typo, press publish, and it counts as an edit. So an edit count does not reflect content or quality of content. So these numbers up here, it could be somebody just fixing commas. It really doesn't tell you about what's going on in terms of substance. And there's a name for Wikipedians who specialize in tiny edits. They're called Wikinomes, and there are lots of them. And anecdotally, I can say that I watch all of the pages that I write or add to, or that my students write or add to, because you can do that. You can click watch this page. And I watch them, and I can tell you that anecdotally, I very rarely see our articles, like I can't think of a single time actually, when I've seen one of the articles that we've written increase in substance. So generally, when I see people make edits, because you can compare the differences, I'm seeing things like, oh, they corrected a category list, or they changed the formatting of something, but nothing in terms of adding new material. Obviously, there are a lot of hot button articles, like if you're going to have an article on the situation in Ukraine, lots of people are going to be piling in and adding to that. But most articles, there's really not much happening at all. And so this is a kind of eye-opening, and it raises questions about the nature of knowledge coming into Wikipedia. The directors of the Wiki Education Foundation, I've heard them cite a statistic, which I'll try to nail down, which is that something like 20% of new content on the English language Wikipedia site comes from them every year, from the students who sign up through American and Canadian universities through this program. I mean, that's an enormous amount that's coming just from this program. So again, a relatively small number of editors do a lot of the work, and a well-known case involves a former US Border Control agent named Stephen Pruitt, alias Ser Amantio Di Nicolau. He took his username from a Puccini opera character, and he's broken the record for having created 33,000 new articles and edited 1/3 of all others. Time magazine declared Pruitt one of the 25 most influential people on the internet in 2017. The Wikipedia article about him, which says that he averages about 3 to 4 hours on the site every day, explains that Pruitt has not, and I'm quoting here, Pruitt has not literally pressed the edit button 4.4 million times. Rather, he has used a software tool that allows him to make numerous identical edits simultaneously. For example, by searching for the name of a journal and italicizing it across many articles. So I've noticed his tiny edits mostly formatting changes on several of the articles that I wrote. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm so flattered that this famous guy has edited my article, but now I think he probably did one of these automated things. It's just like he's changing the commas or something like that. So only a very small proportion of volunteer editors qualified to vote in elections for Wikipedia's board. I have apparently qualified, and I have voted a few times after reading candidates' statements. But I don't really understand how it all works. I do wonder if I would have had a clearer sense of things if I had not started working on Wikipedia right before COVID hit. Because people used to go to these conferences, these multi-day conferences, and they would have sessions and everything. And I feel like I missed out on all of that. And I'm wondering if that's also part of why it has seemed like a more mysterious and opaque process to me. But I mention these elections here because they're an important part of the platform's politics and have convinced me that among all the other things that Wikipedia is not just a world, but a state and a polity, albeit one whose governing structure I sense is out there, but that I have difficulty seeing and apprehending. And I'm not sure if political scientists have really entered into the debates very much about Wikipedia as a kind of a state entity or governing entity, but it's an interesting area for exploration. Now, the literature about Wikipedia is voluminous, and it's hard to keep up with and growing larger by the week. Part of the reason it's so hard to keep up with, as I've realized, is that scholars write about it from so many different fields. So if you're an anthropologist, you're going to be looking mostly at the anthropological literature, and you won't be looking at people writing from, French studies or something like that as much. Right? So that's part of the problem. But what I propose to do now, thinking about the discussion that will follow, is to survey very briefly some of the works that I have found compelling. That will also, for those of you who haven't followed it, give you a sense of the scholarship. So I have a number of things up here. The first one is this book, Darius Jamilniak, Common Knowledge and Ethnography of Wikipedia. He surveys Wikipedia's intricate behind-the-scenes bureaucracy, governing structure, and culture of internal wrangling, but it's very dense. And I read it when I was just learning Wikipedia. I think I need to go back now and reread it because I think I grasp more now than I did at the time. Joseph Riegel and Jackie Kerner, Wikipedia at 20. This book, written to mark the 20th anniversary of Wikipedia, offers short, vivid reflections from early participants who consider Wikipedia's genesis, impact, and connections to other digital platforms, its role in community building, and its future. I think of this book as a collective and very readable memoir, a collective memoir of Wikipedia, which traces its evolution from an initially idealistic, user-driven, but Wild West style movement. And I would recommend this book if you wanted something to assign in a class. The students would find it very accessible. Zachary McDowell and Matthew Vedder's Wikipedia and the Representation of Reality comes from two scholars, one in communication studies, one actually in the field of English composition, which gives you a sense of the disciplinary breadth of the field. And they're interested in the representation of knowledge, vis-a-vis biases, equity, and what they call digital disinformation. Both authors have involved students a lot in Wikipedia writings. They bring that expertise to the table. And in my own classes, I've assigned one of Matthew Vedder's other writings, an article which discusses the challenges of writing about the rural and poor Appalachian region of the United States in the face of limited sources. What I like about his article is that he discusses content gaps that are not only gender-based, but in this case, the sort of a rural-urban divide and the challenges of finding sources. Lori Bridges, this book, it's self-explanatory title. It's really written for people in the library arena, and it gives a sense of ways that librarians can interact with scholars, develop, educators. I mean, librarians are scholars too, but people who are teaching and developing editathons and other events, and discussing how to use Wikipedia resources while promoting information literacy. These two French books next, led a team by Lionel Barre at Paris Nanterre Universities, is from authors who are specialists in communication studies in France, and they study Wikipedia in terms of its governing structure as a participatory encyclopedia and as a vehicle not so much for transmitting knowledge, not as a unidirectional diffusion of knowledge, but as a mediator of knowledge with attention to civic engagement in a very, I think, a very French mode in that sense, right? Like as a republic of letters. Suzanne Kopf, a discursive perspective. She focuses on Wikipedia's techno-discursive design, as she calls it, and how it works vis-a-vis the writing and administration of articles. It's very technical, but she does a good job. So it's sort of a bit too specialized for me in some ways, but she does a very good job surveying the literature. Now, these are broad works. And now I'd like to survey a few works that I have found especially thought-provoking vis-a-vis the politics of Wikipedia. These examples focus, I would say, even more than on the politics, the micro-politics of Wikipedia, using small and focused case studies to illustrate deep issues regarding the platform. So the first book on my list is by Heather Ford, a professor of digital and social media in Australia, called Writing the Revolution, Wikipedia and the Survival of Facts in the Digital Age. You may know this work because it draws on her DPhil thesis from here at Oxford. So she is an Oxford person from the Internet Institute. And she grapples with Wikipedia's ostensible commitment to the, quote, capital N, neutral point of view, NPOV, by studying the history of just one article, which is the article about the 2011 uprisings in Egypt, which led to the ouster of Hosni Mubarak. She follows this article from its creation in 2011, literally within hours of when the uprisings began, and she follows it across a decade as it changed. She considers who wrote and shaped ideas in this article, how information traveled, and the role of algorithms in producing knowledge. She argues that this one article shows how Wikipedia functioned in, quote, the curation not of facts, but of factual data, end quote, with potential to entail cyber warfare or data warfare pursued by online crowds, digital activists, government agents, and private public relations firms. Now, a second work, another excellent article, this one is an article as opposed to a book, and very nuanced micro-political study is by Mark Shuttleworth, who comes from the field of translation studies. He studied Wikipedia articles about the 2015 murder of Boris Nemtsov, a Russian opposition politician and critic of Putin's policy towards Ukraine, to analyze translation and information flows across several language platforms of Wikipedia, especially Russian, English, and Ukrainian, but also Korean, Kazakh, Armenian, Sinhala, and Chinese. He studied these articles as what he called textual collages, and considered what he and others call linguistic points of view, LPOVs, with language and source use creating potentially different ecosystems of facts and biases. His research showed, for example, that the English version of the article on Nemtsov's killing used Russian sources more than the Russian article used English sources, which surprised him because of the power that English Wikipedia might seem to have as a repository of knowledge internationally. Regarding knowledge flows, the Kazakh version of this article, to take one example, was very short and seemed to borrow from the Russian, but not English version, suggesting how patterns of affinity on the part of countries or individual editors shape Wikipedia's multilingual content. He also raised the issue of article decay, how articles degenerate or lose content as they evolve into derivative summaries, as with the Armenian and Sinhala versions of the Nemtsov articles, and the difficulty of determining kinds and degrees of translation, even when checking the revision histories and talk pages, or meaning the discussions that occur underneath the publicly viewable articles. There are a number of strong studies out there on gender biases in Wikipedia. One of my favorites, even though it's for assigning, even though it's somewhat dated, is by the political scientist Elena Catapan on feminism in Canada. And she discusses in a very accessible short article, the implications of women's underrepresentation, both as subjects of articles and as editors. When she wrote this, only about 10% of editors were women, even though women were 50% of readers of Wikipedia. And now that number seems to have gone up to about 20%. She described the platforms, what she called its anti-female culture, and suggested that users who identified as female were more likely than their male counterparts to have their initial contributions to Wikipedia contested or reverted, and then they were less likely to continue writing afterwards. And anecdotally, I can say that I feel like I've experienced that on many occasions when my students and I have published articles on subjects relating to women. Wikipedia can be a really sluggish place, but sometimes we've written things on women and pressed the publish, and within 3 minutes, there's been people on us, editors, anonymous editors, challenging something. And so anecdotally, I really feel I felt that on a number of occasions. Heather Ford, again, and Judy Watchman have a great newer article on Wikipedia's infrastructure and the gender gap. And they argue that Wikipedia's gender gap is about more than topic coverage or editor profiles. It comes down to the culture of coding and infrastructure, which confirms gender biases and entails what they call more taxing emotional labor for women who may find themselves trying to defend articles from minute challenges, such as, if you've ever seen this, the citation needed tag, that is, or banners placed across the top of articles. And I have felt that as well, I have to say. They conclude that the gender gap arises, and I quote, from the broader androcentrism of internet culture, end quote. A scholar of digital communications, Sangeet Kumar, wrote a lively study of edit wars that I really like, meaning disputes over the naming or content of articles that occur behind the scenes on an article's talk page, with some of these escalating until they require outside arbitration from Wikipedia's elected board. His article studied one case of an edit war over the naming of the river Ganga or Ganges. And Kumar, in the process, set out to show, quote, how Wikipedia's emphasis on published evidence, rational argumentation, editorial consensus, and neutrality functions to mask the domination of some forms of knowledge over others, often reflecting the demographics of editors and favoring those who best know the rules and procedures, which also goes to show why having a knowledge of sort of the coding and then also the governing structure can be so useful when you're working in this domain. And finally, I want to draw attention to Jan Grabowski and Shira Klein's recent article called Wikipedia's Intentional Distorting of the Holocaust, which appeared in the Journal of Holocaust Research. And I've got a couple of text-dense slides up, and I'm going to summarize these here. They studied how a small group of Polish right-wing editors spread information while promoting anti-Semitic stereotypes, blaming Jews for their own persecution, dismissing or diminishing evidence of Polish collaboration with the Nazis, and propagating views of the Poles as saviors. These articles, they argue, had a real-world impact on politics in Poland, which in 2018 passed a law that, quote, penalized those who slandered the good name of the Polish nation, end quote, or, quote, blamed the Polish society for crimes committed by the Nazis. What's really interesting about their article also, and the reason I feature it here too, is their laborious but very creative research methods. They studied 25 Wikipedia articles and they looked at lots of back pages, including talk pages, notice boards, differences between versions, arbitration cases, interviewed people, gathered statistical data and so forth. And so they, it was really interesting how they did it. They identified just 11 writers who had written the overwhelming majority of the articles on the subject. And they concluded that these 11 engaged in massaging of the past, ranging from minor errors to subtle manipulation and outright lies. And they discussed the difficulty, the effort of trying to get some of these things removed or challenged. Wikipedia's editorial safeguards were insufficient, they concluded, leaving the platform vulnerable to political agents who could use it to spread misinformation. So as these examples show, the world of Wikipedia is big and scary. It's indeed like the Wild West. It really is. It has big gaps and some shaky ground, but it's also stunning in its intellectual sweep. While its ideal of creating a free universal encyclopedia is inspiring, I think, and worth supporting. So my own view is to engage with it more and not to withdraw from it. And so at the University of Pennsylvania since 2019, as I mentioned, I've been working with students to produce at least one new article each semester tied to course content and supplementing the regular research paper and short essays that they write. And in 3 hours of class time each week, we devote about 20 minutes of in-class time to working together or discussing Wikipedia. So it's just one part of a larger class, and then students are doing a little bit of work on it independently. A couple of months ago, I wrote a library guide for the Penn libraries to give advice to educators who might want to incorporate writing for Wikipedia into their own classes. And you could access this, but I'm going to summarize some of my arguments and suggestions here and practices with ideas of applying some of these things that we're learning. So, as I mentioned earlier, I partner with this foundation in San Francisco called the Wiki Education Foundation. Their goal is to diversify and strengthen content on Wikipedia by working with educators in US and Canadian universities. And I tie the Wikipedia component to course content. And to give one example of a page that my students wrote in my class, this was on an Iranian Azerbaijani chef who was one of the first to publish an Iranian cookbook for Americans in the mid-20th century. And we wrote about, a biographical article on her. And this is an example of what we have done. Wikipedia gives the Wiki Edu Foundation gives each course a dashboard, which is more user-friendly, more visually appealing and easier to navigate than Wikipedia itself. And the educator planning the course can enter times, dates, and assignments in advance. And the dashboard arranges that information in a timeline and has tutorials that students can do week by week and exercises to practice. And they, some of them will be on plagiarism, citation, making small edits, and so forth. And it also, to go back along the top here, you can see it keeps track of what students do and in completing things, and it produces anonymized metrics which show how many words, citations, and media uploads members of the class have added, and how many times members of the public have read the articles to which they contributed. Learning to edit and write for Wikipedia serves many pedagogical goals. So, for example, learning to edit and write can boost skills in research, writing, and critical analysis of texts and images, cultivate a keener sense of information literacy, sharpen an awareness of metadata, and because you have to add some of that when you're adding citations and so forth, give students examples of citing works properly and make them more aware of copyright. It can prompt consideration of tone in academic writing, along with the nature of neutrality and bias. It forces students and everybody to think about what Wikipedia thinks notability is, who counts, who or what might deserve an article, or how you can make a case for having an article is really what it's more about. And since, Wikipedia is a work in progress, it's not fixed, it also makes students more aware of the importance of revision and drafting. And I think these research skills translate into other forms of academic writing that are so useful, which is, if you're writing a thesis for a bachelor's degree or a PhD thesis, the skills that you can develop, I think, really carry over very smoothly. And I would also add that Wikipedia offers opportunities for teamwork in ways that can foster camaraderie within the classroom. And camaraderie and collaboration, I think, are increasingly important. Since the COVID pandemic, students increasingly tell me that they are lonely. And they're often very open about that now. I suspect that the University of Pennsylvania may be an even lonelier place than Oxford, because there are fewer opportunities to get together for meals, and Philadelphia is a bigger city. So I think it's a real problem. And so getting students to work together during class, even if it's only for 20 minutes, gives them a chance to socialize in an academic way through scholarship. And typically what I do is I place students in small randomized groups of about 3 to 4 people, so that they're actually not with their friends, because a lot of people come to class and already know people, and it's really important to group people in ways where they don't know one another. And I think, and I'll ask them to research a particular aspect of the article that we're going to do, to look for sources or to summarize it, maybe working on a Google Doc, to draft or revise together. And that, I think, leads to a greater sense of well-being for the students and makes the experience more fun and more meaningful. So that's something I definitely would continue to do. I should just say something about this image here, by the way. Those are my cookies on my plate and my carpet, because one of the things, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is making sure that you have photographs that are copyright compliant. So that's another thing that I do, and I'll talk about that. Now, my impression is that the majority of educators who participate in Wiki Education's programs are engaging students in editing and improving existing articles, making citations more robust, revising, but I think most of them are actually revising prose to improve the literary flow or neutrality, or improve the grammar, and they're not, in some cases, they're expanding content. But I think that's also why it's so popular for English classes, because I think there's a lot of that kind of editing. But I prefer instead to engage students in collective efforts to research, draft, and publish new articles on things that are connected to the course content. So that's number one, writing new articles. I've also begun, and I would very much recommend this, to get students involved in Wikimedia Commons by uploading an image of their own, such as a campus photograph. These are my students' photographs. I had them take photographs around the campus. I realized when you would go to the Wikimedia Commons and search on University of Pennsylvania, it actually wouldn't come up with that much that they could use with a Creative Commons license. So I had them take a photo on their cell phone, upload it. We talked about what the copyright protocols are, what it means, what the different licenses mean. Then they have to add captions that are appropriate. That's actually trickier than you would think. People don't necessarily get what that is to enhance findability. So there were a lot of things that this did. And then the WikiEdu dashboard also gives information on the file. And one thing that's cool about this is one of my students' photographs of campus. And it's cool that it shows that somebody else has actually used this in an article, so where the file usage occurs. And one of the things, and I'll come back to this, you can see who the author is, Punxsutawney Phil, Pennsylvania. Not sure if you know who Punxsutawney Phil is. That's the name of the groundhog that comes up every year on February 2nd, if you know if the winter's going to be long or short, if he sees his shadow. or not. But the reason I mention that is because it's a username that's largely anonymous, and I'll come back to that issue about relative anonymity on Wikipedia. So anyway, Wikimedia Commons, I would very much recommend that. But a third assignment that is really great that I would recommend is to have students analyze a talk page, perhaps a page under active arbitration remedies, and have students to give an oral presentation or write an essay on the page. And because here's what I mean. Here's a page on a Middle Eastern flatbread. And then if you go behind to the talk page that's underneath, you see that where the article is, and then the talk page, you'll get to this. And you wouldn't see this if you were just looking at the top page. So this page would not let a new editor add to it. It says that it's related to the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's a restricted topic. You're not an extended confirmed user. Actually, I am, but I logged out so that I would not look like, so you could see what it would be. And then you can go down and see how people have argued about this flatbread and what the nature of the arguments have been. And students find that really fascinating. It enables them to see the kind of contestation, the edit wars, to go back to that concept from Sangeet Kumar's article. And it's a really productive way. If you looked at the article on hummus or falafel, you would find something similar. So that's really useful. So that's just 3 examples. Now, to start towards wrapping up, I'll just say a few more things here. One of the best things about getting students to write for Wikipedia is that it can cultivate a sense of digital citizenship and lead to public-facing scholarship. I first heard the term digital citizenship from Helene Blumenthal at the WikiEdu Foundation, who's a really inspiring person. And I thought she was the one who first used the term when I heard it. She spoke about it in terms of fostering an ethical awareness of and engagement with the internet, along with the idea of being part of a global community and acting responsibly for collective well-being. I propose that we could fruitfully adapt the philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah's idea of rooted cosmopolitanism here too, to think about a rooted digital cosmopolitanism, recognizing that people, in this case, fellow Wikipedia editors and readers, are citizens of the world, but possibly rooted in localities and having social and cultural outlooks that deserve respect. So rooted digital cosmopolitanism. And meanwhile, as for public-facing scholarship, instead of getting students to write essays that they will never think about ever again, I say, get us to produce, not only consume knowledge. And this is where the idea of public-facing scholarship comes from. Scholarship to share with the public. The fact that students at Oxford or at the University of Pennsylvania have so many educational privileges, including access to an excellent library with subscriptions to all kinds of digital platforms, makes writing for Wikipedia a valuable civic contribution. And I emphasize to my students that they should also be writing with educated 13 and 14-year-olds in mind, because a lot of the users of Wikipedia are students in middle schools who really won't have much access, but who need overviews. So you have to change your tone to address, as you write, to address and reach out to a broader audience and share what you have that way. An advantage of Wikipedia over some other forms of public-facing scholarship is that it ensures a higher degree of privacy than, say, a blog. And this is where I come back to this idea. Because editors choose usernames, typically not their real names. You can, but it's not a good idea. And because articles are not fixed texts, but potential or theoretical continuing works in progress, that helps to protect them, helps to protect students. And in the last year, our university's Office of General Counsel, that's the name for the big guns of the university's legal team. Those are the serious people. And they issued from on high a declaration, or they engaged in they said we have to tighten the rules about student privacy with regard to having them do work on internet platforms, digital platforms. And so they tighten policies vis-a-vis the publication of articles, blogs, podcasts, videos, and the like. But Wikipedia, by allowing for anonymized usernames and by being a work in progress without single authorship, I think will not fall under some of those restrictions and may protect students more easily and may therefore also become more doable than certain other digital humanities platforms. And I have a specific example to give you. 2 years ago, I did an amazing project with students where the students wrote incredible essays about one community cookbook from a synagogue in Los Angeles, a Sephardic synagogue. And they wrote articles about the history of the ingredients and the peoples who migrated and the individual recipes. And we put it up on Manifold, which is a wonderful platform for publishing books. But, and the university library has published it. You can see it now as an ebook on the website, but I don't think we could do it now that these new regulations have come in. And with the digital publishing fellow, a postdoctoral scholar named Cosette Bruns Alonso, who's actually a specialist in Dante studies in Italian, we wrote an article about the challenges that we faced using this platform in the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy. And one of the things we discuss in this article is the privacy issue and how that impeded us from replicating this experience. So I think Wikipedia will still be possible, but other things I think will become harder for us to do. Now, I'm going to give you just a few more examples just to show you. It's like Florence Shotridge, I had to put this up for Maria. This is one of the first ones we ever did. It's a case where once you write the article, you realize, how was that not there before? That's what Wikipedia is like. Like, how was there not an article for Florence Shotridge before we did it? So this points to gaps and the difficulty of even realizing what gaps are there until you write an article. And then it's like, oh yeah, why wasn't that there before? So that's one example. Noel Nasrallah, about an Iraqi-American food historian who's translated medieval cookbooks. That was great. We did this over COVID in my food history class, and I realized there the importance of the photography. That's medieval hummus that one of my students made. And we used our own photographs and realizing the copyright rules for that. Then with first-year undergraduates, I wrote an article on a 13th century palace complex in Mosul, Iraq. And that was cool because they didn't think that they could be experts speaking about this. This was an interesting article to write because we had to translate German and Arabic materials in order to be able to write it. So that was like another mode of learning for us in doing this and finding sources for it. Okay, so those are just a few examples. And now really to conclude, you may be aware of a controversy involving Wikipedia and the Irish Supreme Court. Does this ring a bell with anybody? No, okay. So in 2022, a team at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, working in collaboration with scholars at Cornell University and Maynooth University in Ireland, published a randomized field experiment suggesting that publication of a Wikipedia article increased a case's citation in the Irish Supreme Court by more than 20%. It was a study of Irish legal cases. Irish judges seem to have been unhappy about this study, which suggested that they were being influenced a lot by Wikipedia. And I see that the Irish Legal News reported in 2023, a year later, that a team of Irish lawyers had conducted their own study suggesting that the research of Thompson and others was flawed. In fact, in 2018, the same Thompson who did this study had published an earlier study just on chemistry, on the field of chemistry. And he showed in that study that Wikipedia articles on chemistry influence the discourses and topics that were studied in the field of chemistry as reflected in articles that came out afterwards. And also he studied citations. Citation flows was one of the things he studied. Now, anecdotally, again, I've seen evidence that articles by my students and me have had a discursive impact as well. And I'm going to close with two examples. The first involves a colleague who's an archaeologist who's become extensively involved in efforts to reconstruct buildings in Mosul, Iraq, that were damaged by the Islamic State in 2016 and 2017 when it was occupying the city. A lot of heavy damage to historic buildings, and this colleague got involved with scholars at the University of Mosul to raise money from the US State Department and from a Swiss and German foundation to rebuild. And when I was asking this colleague for ideas of what articles on Wikipedia I could write with my students, he said, you know, it would be really great if you could write about this one house, Beit Tutunji, which we're trying to restore, an Ottoman merchant's house from the early 19th century in Mosul. And an example, as you can see here, of Ottoman vernacular architecture. There was no webpage for it. He pointed us to some citations and I found some more. My students wrote a wonderful article, I think, on this building. And then my colleague told me that when the restoration was complete, there was a press conference to mark its reopening. And he wrote to me and he said, guess what? They issued a press release, this Swiss and the Iraqi government and the Swiss Foundation and everybody issued a press release. And I can tell they're echoing your Wikipedia article because he knew what was in it. And he knew some of the details that we'd put in and where they would have gotten it. And so he said, yeah, look, it's like it's had this impact. I'm actually hopeful that a real world impact of this article on this house will be that it will help to raise more funds for it in the future, that it has a kind of a social advocacy purpose, like, oh, it has a Wikipedia article, it must be important. And then it will make it easier for people in Mosul, conservationists, to try to raise money. So that's one example. And the second case involves another article from my food history class that students and I wrote about Helen Corey, a Syrian-American cookbook author from Indiana. I suggested the idea of writing about her because I'd seen her cookbook on my bookshelf in New Jersey when I was a kid growing up. And we had very few cookbooks, but we had hers. And so I was like, she sounds like an interesting person. And I discovered that she was one of these people who introduced middle America to Middle Eastern food in the mid-20th century. And so we wrote this article. And then what's clear is that our article seems to have inspired another article about her that appeared a year later on the State of Indiana website. You can see Helen Corey here with John F. Kennedy. The reason why I'm convinced that my article and my students' article influenced this and led to this is because I remember when I was writing the article, I said, well, you know, in Wikipedia, you're not supposed to argue for new scholarship. You're just supposed to summarize what's already out there. But it's so obvious that Helen Corey was a forerunner to culinary diplomacy, that she was really a diplomat. And I put that in the Wikipedia article. And so then it's really striking that there was no article about her. She'd been forgotten. She died this past year at the age of 100. And now she's being described as though it's a fact that she's a food ambassador. So this is an example. And so I suspect that there is I believe there's truth in, I think, this study about the Irish Supreme Court. It just makes sense. It's not about the Irish Supreme Court. It's about Wikipedia. Wikipedia may indeed have informed its legal decisions. It's not surprising, given what we know, that Wikipedia has such a strong influence on discourses and ideas. That's exactly why we need to be vigilant and why we need to get involved in contributing to the improvement and expansion of this encyclopedia as it covers the world. So thank you, and I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thank you, crikey. Whoa. I don't know where to start. That's excellent. What about, can you say more about notability?
About what, sorry?
Notability. And
Notability.
kind of how to tangle with it. I mean, I've encountered it variously, both in making pages for, well, actually, I made a page for Marcus Banks, one of our colleagues who died, and it was something of a struggle to get the page that I had drafted accepted. So that's one, and you'd think kind of mainstream Western academics, but also writing about people in Cameroon, where there's an issue that there are very few sources. So, and
Okay, yeah, that's big. So as an anthropologist turned historian, I think I have a hunch for and like a conviction about who is notable and who qualifies. So if you feel that somebody is notable or not just somebody, it could be a building or whatever it is, then you have to stand up, you have to stand your ground and make the case. I have had it challenged before. Once I wrote an article about a scholar, similar, I think, to what you're describing, and somebody put on that tag that nominated the article for deletion, suggesting that the person wasn't notable. And then one of the higher up anonymous editors said, no, generally established professors and universities qualify for notability by virtue of having published, or something like that. And so it stood. But in other ways, I would just say, you have to stand your ground and maybe show it to somebody who can give you advice on pitching it in a way that might be more effective in the opening paragraph. What I would say about the Cameroonian case, it's what Matthew Vedder pointed out in that article about Appalachia, which you might want to read. It's more difficult, he points out, to get rural versus urban sources, even for US communities and topics. In the case of one of these buildings in Mosul, we really had to scour sources. Now, Wikipedia has some arcane rules. You can't use oral sources. So there are ways it's very different from other research that we would do. My advice on what to do, practical advice on what to do in such a case, is to make sure that your backup citations are really strong. So for example, if you are publishing an article on a person in Cameroon, I would say make sure that you cite, the standard general Cameroonian histories that could give backup to the place where the region of Cameroon where this person was from. So in other words, like to set up the infrastructure around the scaffolding around the person, that will give your article the feeling of credibility that will make anonymous editors say, oh, okay, whoever wrote this knows where this person fits into the ecosystem. So that's what I would do. In cases where you have fragmentary information about your topic, you have to build out the scaffolding more. That's I think, a practical thing. And then there are the other, like, more psychological things. I just made a addition to a page on a town in Kansas that I've never been to, and I probably will never go, because it's a really small town with only 2,000 people in it. So I made a contribution because I realized that this town had been an important site for the publishing of cookbooks. And so I thought that's really interesting. It's not anymore. The publishing company moved out. But I added this in there because it's this town of 2,000 people, and it's really an interesting fact that it came from there. And then an anonymous, this is one of the things I wonder if it's gendered, because I was writing about cookbooks written by women, popular cookbooks. And they said, well, this isn't, you don't have the, you don't have a scholarly source to back this up. Well, there's not going to be a lot written about this town of 2,000 people in the middle of Kansas. So what I did in this case, this was just a couple of weeks ago, I said, I recognize your point. I'm continuing to look for it. And I'm hopeful that I'll be able to find more, but I think it's an important point about this town for the moment. And I put that on the talk page. So I think one strategy, we're talking now practical strategies, is to engage with the talk page, to try to show goodwill, seriousness, openness to revision, and then you can kind of remove some of the struggles that people might have. That way, if your case ever does go to that arbitration level, the editors, whoever is able to do that, will look at it and say, oh, this person has really tried to take this issue seriously and is trying to address it.
Thank you. Do you know the literature on women's words in the OED?
No.
Oh, there's,
I'd love to see that.
There's some stuff about that.
Oh, very interesting. I'd love to see it.
Particularly about words in cookbooks, which were ignored in the 19th century and started coming in the 20th.
That's fascinating. I'd love to see that. Because that relates to cookbooks in general, that a lot of institutions have not collected.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any questions online?
At least one offline.
Where?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, sorry, offline, you were saying,
Yeah.
I thought you were pointing at my screen.
Okay. I sort of have two questions, but they're kind of connected. But you started off by saying like certain schools don't want students to use Wikipedia as a source and others do, so sort of like the credibility of it, and like connecting to this example at the end, the Helen Corey, how you just sort of have a feeling that your article influenced it, but like at least for me, I don't cite Wikipedia when I use it because I think it ruins the credibility. I don't know.
Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
I would not cite, I don't allow my students to cite Wikipedia in research papers unless the article is about Wikipedia or they're using Wikipedia as a discursive element. And by the way, I've been on panels with colleagues through these kinds of conferences that I've been going to at some of the large state universities that actually seem to allow students to use the Wikipedia stuff. No, but I think part of the problem is what I'm trying to do is to increase, as you know, as we did with our article, the scholarly rigor of things that are up there. But I'm also at the same time trying to get students to be aware of what it means to use refereed sources, and they increasingly don't know that. And they also, by the way, I'm seeing this at Penn, they don't understand what metadata is. They are really bad at searching for things in the library catalog. They're much better, they can Google, but that's not the same as looking for a source through the university library catalog. So I'm very clear about that. But then I also discuss, well, what is a good way to use Wikipedia? And many people say, and I do agree with this, that it's a good first start. You go to the Wikipedia and you don't know where to begin. You're studying something that's completely new to you. So you go to an article and you look and you see, wait, what did they cite? Sometimes people haven't cited very much at all. Then you can add citations. But it might be a good place to start.
What was your second?
Yeah, kind of connected to that, like, do you think like we'll get, like, cause I think, trying to make Wikipedia more scholarly rigorous and stuff, but like, would you put your Wikipedia articles on your CV? Like, do you think it's, like, what's its place, I guess?
No, I can't. And actually, that's why a lot of my scholars, a lot of my colleagues would never participate in Wikipedia. Because they would say, well, what's it going to do for my career? It's not going to do anything for my career because Wikipedia articles are not fixed entities and they are subject to editing. So even if I write the initial article, my students and we wrote the article, the Florence Shotridge article is not ours, right? Anybody can edit it. So we could maybe say that we published the article. That might be something you could put on your CV, that you wrote the first article on it. That I think you could put, but you couldn't put that you added to the article. I don't think you could put that. But then I actually don't cite that at all. So why do I do it? I do it because it enriches my life and I like learning and I get to write about things that are not actually in my official areas of expertise. I really love the intellectual exploration that Wikipedia provides, and it really has enriched my life tremendously. So but I also believe that it is a kind of a civic action to be sharing that way. So it's meaningful to me, but the actual writing for it is part of my personal life. And my scholarly life with Wikipedia is more about giving conference papers, because I actually, by the way, regard the stuff that I talked about with teaching. Increasingly, I think of the teaching as a form of scholarship. I mean, you guys are mostly anthropologists. I'm a historian, but in education schools of education, they do write about pedagogy. And that's a valid field of scholarship. It's maybe different from what we do, But it's a really serious field, and so that, if you give, conference papers, you go to, I spoke at the American Historical Association, as I said online, that goes on my CV. That I think is teaching as scholarship, for example.
Anybody else, or can I go? Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, and it's been. When I think back to the early, when Wikipedia was first emerging, and I remember there was a lot of panic, almost sort of moral panic of Web 2.0 at that time, and what it meant when non-experts could start contributing knowledge in so many domains online, including Wikipedia. And I wonder how much this relates to the current discussions about ChatGPT. And that I have a question more about, while you were presenting, I wanted to ask you if you agree with this general perspective, that in some ways, with the emergence of large language models, primarily ChatGPT, would you say that Wikipedia has both at the same time become less important and more important as a source of public knowledge? Because I would say less important in the sense that that same 16-year-old that would have gone to Wikipedia is now going to ChatGPT to search, right? To search for information or to create an entire paper. But so on one hand, they're maybe not going directly to Wikipedia because they've got a much more direct source right there where they don't even have to read the actual article itself. But on the second hand, we know that ChatGPT is scraping at a large, I don't know the exact amount, but large amount of its knowledge is from Wikipedia.
Oh.
And what's interesting here is that you've got another source of mediation in between, where a lot of that information that let's say 16-year-old, but it's us as well, of course, is getting for that ChatGPT derived article is coming from Wikipedia, but they don't exactly know that it's coming from Wikipedia.
Right.
And so how does that affect their understanding of?
Yeah, these are great questions. Obviously, you won't be surprised I don't have an easy answer, but I have partial answers, which is one of my concerns. So I think Wikipedia is going to remain as important as ever, precisely because ChatGPT has to get its information from somewhere, right? And it's, as you say, scraping it from Wikipedia. But at the same time, as I've mentioned, I very rarely see people adding substance to Wikipedia. And even when it comes, you see that citation needed tag. It would be not that much effort for somebody to go in and look for a citation to add. But usually people are just like adding that. It's like, oh, well, somebody else has to do that. And they're not actually stopping to do it themselves. So even when you'd be surprised how many articles, maybe there are some where you can go to the end and say, oh, that's a great place to start. I mean, I've been doing that for things that are new to me. Oh, okay, that will get me started on my literature search. But there are a lot of articles that just don't have much at all on there. And then there are the gaps. And so what I feel like I'm seeing, even with the internet results that are coming up now, is this very watered down, generalized, genericized, rehashed things that are coming up in the summaries now on the search pages. But, you have to have this thing, the knowledge production, the new knowledge production. That's not what ChatGPT is going to be doing. It's just going to be scraping what's out there. So in terms of putting new material on Wikipedia, I think that's going to be as important than ever for knowledge production, but there's not that as much of it as you might think. I'm not sure if that answers what you're asking, but I guess in short, I would say Wikipedia is going to remain important, but it has a lot of gaps, and the search results or the ChatGPT results that people get, it's only going to be as good as the material on which it can draw.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was first time I started thinking to do in Georgian Wikipedia, especially in my field. As I guess I was checking if there's information, I think that it's important to, and it's also important to have this information in, for example, in English. But I have some, I don't know, some details, and I'm sorry if I make the question, which is seems like ridiculous. For example, if I wrote article and someone is editing or find it something problem with this, it's a problem with these small languages where there is not so many people who knows and expertise in the field, and how how these controversies could be solved in this moment. If for it's about the history, it's about this life for biography of someone's biography. There could be some different ideas of what's happened.
Now, that's a really interesting thing, and my impression is, and I'm not, here's my impression, you know, that there's not been that much scholarship in English about the dynamics of some of the non-English versions. That's why I really like that Shuttleworth article, which I found very subtle, and I would encourage you to look at it. I suspect if you are interested in this, it sounds to me like you could write an article about this that would benefit all of us, to let us know what happens with the Georgian language platform. Like if you could provide for us, and us, I mean Wikipedia scholars, this would be a great research subject to write a kind of ethnography of Wikipedia in Georgian, and to consider some of the dynamics of that process. Part of what also makes it complicated is you suggested the fact that there might be different interpretations of historic events, but it could be something much more banal, just that there are different possibilities or versions. So sometimes I've noticed, the only other Wikipedia platform that I find myself reading a lot is the French one. And sometimes I see that there will be two articles, and like there is an English page or there's a French page there will be a page for both, or sometimes not. I actually wrote a Wikipedia article about somebody who's French, but who didn't have a page in French. So I wrote it in English. And then, you know, the French page, when it emerged, was largely a translation, I think, of my English page. But then there are other cases where people are going in independently to different language versions, and then they're adding to it. And so, and it's what Shuttleworth said. I'm not sure how good Wikipedia is at comparing the different translations. And they seem to operate very independently, so that if you even wanted to, you can't even link in the English page, for example. Let's say you were writing on a Georgian topic. You can't directly link to a Georgian Wikipedia page. You have to include it as an external citation, which is really weird. So, so it's actually, I think more needs to be done on the interface between different language versions, and then on the dynamics within language versions. And I suspect if you're looking for a research topic, this would be a great thing to write about.
And one more, I meant also the things that, for example, something which is not recognized, for example, Abkhazia, part of Georgia. So on the things, I remember the discussions in the social media, it was about these conflicts and this, how it's presented in English. They worried much more about the English version that could much more, it's for broader audience than in Georgian or in Abkhazian. or it's the South Ossetia and these kind of stuff. And I also was curious about if I wrote about the Armenian main dishes tolma, and Azeris would say that it's not Armenian, it's Azeris.
Right.
So it's about the food, but still there is this.
Oh, I've actually looked at some of the Dolma pages and not that. So that's really interesting. I mean, you would be wading into a very hot button topic of a minefield. And you would be wandering into a minefield if you tried to write about Abkhazia, I'm sure. And that reminds me, like, if you haven't read Heather Ford's book, you would want to read it. To get an idea about what can happen with one article, right? To see so it would be hard to give advice on that. Advice on the Dolma, for example, I mean, one way I've seen people do is you give it a sort of a very specific name, like Georgian Dolma or something like that. So it doesn't sound like you're claiming the food for the whole, or go to the page and see how it's dealing with the Turkish versus the Armenian and other Jordanian, whatever it is, the other versions, and see how it goes. But then it's very possible your article could get placed under that active arbitration remedy if people found it too explosive. One way of trying to avoid that is not to make your article too inflammatory or to claim too much or to overstretch. So these are, some of the issues that happen all the time. I would suggest looking at baklava. That would be a good one.
Yeah.
See how the Turkish, Greek, Egyptian dynamic has been handled on that. And that would give you an idea of what to look for, which is separate from if you wanted to write it yourself. We're talking about kind of two.
I just took as an example, which could be this tension between on this. And one more question about this. If someone decided that he or she is quite enough sufficient person that could include her or his biography at Wikipedia, and he can he will write about him or herself as a very sophisticated guy, and someone who is very important in the field. How we deal with, because I know some cases when I find someone which is quite ridiculous to find it at Wikipedia, together with someone who is very noble and very important.
Yeah, I have seen cases like that myself. I don't know how to pose the challenges. This is one of these insider issues, but you see that a lot. And one of the banners that you'll often see across the top of pages is this article is written in a tone that suggests self-promotion. It may be nominated for deletion and so on. But you're right. I mean, one of the problems with Wikipedia is that sometimes, occasionally, but occasionally I'll stumble across a page which feels like it was a public relations exercise written by somebody's agent rather than like a biographical article. And it always does amaze me how things stay up or don't stay up. So that is, again, one of the issues that you would want to consider. And I think the Jamilniak book addresses some of those issues. And you would probably be able to find a scholarship on that. But the actual dynamics of taking an article down, I don't really know how to do that myself. And I mean, not that I would want to, but that's a whole thing. And you would be able to find material on that kind of situation.
There are commercial firms that offer writing services for large sums of money. And it's massively disapproved of course, because they have very obvious conflict.
And I'm wondering who is the owner, who is of this Wikipedia, who?
There's no owner, and that's exactly this issue of this board, this very diffuse elected board of people who are trying to maintain standards and different editors who specialize in different kinds of issues and sections.
I'm sorry, do we have time for one more question from
Oh,
online?
please, yeah, sorry, I've stopped looking online, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you very much, Professor Sharkey, for your question, for your great talk. I've just been able to get so much from hearing you speak about this subject. I wanted to return to the first question on notability specifically, and how to sort of handle that and knowledge production as well. So I'm in a scenario at the moment where I'm preparing an article for creation on Wikipedia, but I've chosen to do this on a very a subject that is not, that doesn't have like an extensive secondary resources that are specifically about the person. Of course, there are larger texts or other secondary sources about the topic more generally, but not about the specific individual. And you had mentioned in response to the question that it made sense to cite as a practical strategy to cite sort of the text around this individual, but I'm just wondering about how Wikipedia responds to knowledge production actually when there isn't secondary sources. Is Wikipedia a good place to start creating secondary sources for individuals that makes, I'm a historian as well, that sort of have historical significance or I'm part of a particular project, but are not really noted in other places by other historians and so on. I'm just curious about how you
great.
see that.
Yeah, great. I think I realized I have a second piece of advice. Building on your question and Professor Zeitlin's question earlier. So I said I would suggest building up the secondary literature around it. Here's another strategy that I would recommend. Keep the article on this person relatively short. I would say, don't feel like, okay, I've got to justify why this person is up there too much. Like, make your case very clearly in the opening lines. Have, you know, the basics that you have some of the backup sources and keep it short. Here's why. I think your strategy should be to publish the article and get it to stay up. That's what you want to achieve. And there are articles you will notice, like there are these different kinds of classes, which is something I need to figure out how to do. It's on, like, I wish I could learn how to do this myself, but you'll notice that some articles on Wikipedia, biographies, and others are called stubs, you know? And then there will be A class, B class, C class. By the way, don't be freaked out if somebody gives your article a C. It doesn't mean like a C grade. It refers to the level of they need to come up with a better term, but the level of how extensive the article is. It's okay to have an article that's a stub. Your goal, I would suggest, should be to write briefly, succinctly, be very succinct, provide some of the background, get it up so that it can stay up. Once it stays up, once you've got that, and it might be a stub article in there or a start class, it's sometimes called, then you can go back if you are able to find more, or if you want to fill in some of the secondary background literature, and then you can add. So I would say keep your article modest, don't overstretch your claims, make your goal getting it up there, and then you will have the opportunity to expand and the possibility of inspiring others to try to find out more going forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do we have time? So.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Yuri Kim. I'm a professor of communications and journalism from Seoul, South Korea. I teach at a university called Hoi University in the capital city of Seoul. I don't have questions per se, but I do have a few comments I'd like to make. Thank you so much for such a inspiring lecture. The first point I wanted to make is I appreciate the fact that you mentioned the idea of gender imbalance in the realm of Wikipedia. And one of the courses I teach at Hoi University is called Mass Media and Society, where the course aims to enhance the students' understanding of the role of mass media and its impact on our society at large, whether it's made to promote or undermine the well-being of our society at large. And one key idea we always get to is this gender imbalance issue and gender stereotyping issue in the realm of mass media. And I was very surprised that you mentioned this idea, underrepresentation of women in the world of Wiki, and I love the way you tied that into the idea of Wikipedia being a political space. It was very, very interesting to learn about. And second of all, as a professor who has to give assignments each week, I was very fascinated to know that there could be so many educational ways you can use Wiki in the classrooms at the university levels, which I'd really actually never thought about. I really do have to confess to you that I don't like it when students cite Wiki on their papers.
I don't let them cite it.
Yeah, you did mention that, and I actually discourage them from using it too often when they do their research. But you did mention several different ways of very wholesome and educational assignments with learning values could be incorporated in lectures each week. So thank you so much. And also, lastly, the Korean version of the Wikipedia is really not so significant, I would say. There's not much on it. And when I go back to my home country, I am really interested in looking for ways to enhance the Korean version of Wiki and participating in it somehow. And I will make sure to check out the Educational Foundation based in San Francisco. You did mention to leverage this idea more. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. And you know, a couple of thoughts. One is I would recommend the talk page assignment for politics. And as an easy way to begin, Wikimedia Commons and photographs. That would be really useful.
Yes.
The third thing I would say is that even if you want to enhance, you know, Korean, you said the Korean language platform version, another thing you could also do is to enhance coverage of Korean topics on the English language platform.
Right.
Or like Georgian topics on the English language platform. And then to consider possibilities or to look and see what's on the English language platform for ideas and vice versa. The gaps that are there, just to be attentive to the gaps on the Korean side, but also on the English side with reference to Korean materials.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Before we start, do you want to say anything or not, or save it for the pub?
I'll save it for the pub.
Okay. I wanted to say, oh God, one thing just to note, Bill knows, but I don't, that Heather Thorne not only has a doctorate from Oxford, but she was one of the founding students involved in this seminar.
Oh, wow.
So, she was, yeah.
Literally one of the first people that walked through the door.
Yeah.
Wow, so you can tell her that her work is wonderful and that I mentioned two of their things, so.
And I'm sure there was something else which I have now forgotten, which I will talk. So please, we, as well as thanking Heather for such an inspiring talk, we will take her to a drink to the Rose and Crown up the road, and please come and join us for a drink and we can carry on talking and possibly, I haven't checked, has the Rose and Crown got a Wikipedia page? So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're gonna need to tomorrow, Robert. Yeah,
Professor Tristan.
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you were coming. Very nice to meet
So
you.
you're leaving on Wednesday?
Yes.